All right. Good afternoon. My name is Sandra. I am the PR and development specialist at Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center. Thank you guys for joining us this month for our monthly Lunch and Learn. This month, January, is Stalking Awareness Month. And so we wanted to make sure, I feel like this ties into the other month that we did on domestic violence. I mean, it could tie in. But again, giving you tips, hints, info on stalking, what stalking is, what it kind of looks like these days, maybe different than what we imagine in our head. But we'll hop into that in just a second. Let me do this round of introductions. First, I have with me Rick Wiggs and Mark Kurkowski. Did I slaughter that? Is that okay? Okay.
Yes.
And I will let them introduce themselves. So I'll start with Rick.
Hi, yeah, I'm Rick Wiggs. I am a husband of a stalking victim, late victim, that is. My wife was murdered back in 1992. Stalking itself probably started the moment we started dating, maybe in 1980, around 1983, around that time. But unfortunately, it didn't come to light with me until 1989. But that's just a brief intro.
And Rick is one of our board members and has been with us for quite some time. So definitely want to tap that into there. And then Mark.
Yeah, my name is Mark Kurkowski. I'm a retired law enforcement officer at the St. Louis City Police Department. I worked in 3 different grants within our domestic violence unit. I served with the police department for 27 years before I retired. I currently am the owner of Kurkowski Consulting and Training. So I train locally, statewide, nationally on the topics of intimate partner violence and stalking. And I've trained in 48 states, Guam, and recently just was part of being in episode 6 of I Am a Stalker. It's a Netflix documentary that's still being aired. So if you haven't looked at that, that's also kind of an interesting documentary on stalking in the United States.
Wow. Well, I did see that in my scrolling the other day. I didn't choose it, but I did see it. So we'll see how that goes in the future. So I guess, one of the things I also want to share is that I did attend a conference that Mark presented at, and that's how I got his information. Things are a little rough around here as far as our staff. We've had some movement, so we don't have an attorney with us today, although I'm hoping to grab one if possible. So keeping my eyes open. I am watching the chat box on Facebook. So if you're watching with us on Facebook, please feel free to enter any questions into the chat box. With that being said, I wanted to just hop right in. I think that we can start with Rick's story, but I wanted to just add before that in my head, when I think about stalking, I think of Bodyguard, the movie Bodyguard. And I feel like that is kind of like the old-fashioned way of thinking about stalking. Like it was like this starstruck kind of, it happened to famous people. And that was like the way that it was thought about like in the early 80s, right, Rick? That's kind of how you...
Yeah, back in the 80s, stalking was pretty much, like you stated, a celebrity crime. And although I should say the amount of attention to it being a problem was focused on celebrities and not regular people or regular folks. So stalking in itself is, minimal surveillance. It's consistent contact, unwanted contact in regards to telephone calls and different things. Back in the 80s, we're not talking text because none of that existed, but happened to appear at some location similar on a kind of repeated basis. There's always a pattern established. And, the question I've had before was, what is a pattern? It's the moment you first find out, the first moment you get that feeling. And for my wife, Sharon, she, from what I understood, was being approached off and on or called telephone calls, different things like that. The This is while we were dating. After we married in 1986, things were still pretty much cool and calm. But I remember a couple of times of her vehicle being vandalized. Back then she had a 1984 Ford Escort, and for some reason, once we went to drive to um, Virginia Beach, and the car pretty much stalled down there. Found out that there was sugar in the tank. It was little things that were going off, but we had no clue of why or who. I didn't, I should say. So it wasn't until 1989 when her car was vandalized, again, a different vehicle. And that's when she finally told me what was going on. She had been in contact with her mother about it, her parents about it, but she had not said anything to me about it. And she was fearful of me going out and trying to seek some type of vindication against. So after that, we were living in DC. We went downtown DC and filed a document. It wasn't a restraining order. It wasn't basically really a stay away order, but it was a cease in the action. And we filed it with DC. Sharon wasn't sure if he still lived in the same area, so we had it sent to his parents' home. And things were quiet for the next 2 years, 3 years. And then it was around this time, January of 1992, when her car was last vandalized again. And at that time, it was instead of spray paint or sugar in the tank, this time it was all tires were slashed and a bullet in the side, left side door of her vehicle parked. So we had the car put in the shop. We got it back, got the bullet fragment out of the door from the auto body, and kept that. And 3 weeks later, they decided to follow through on the action. And on February 15th, I was shot first because I didn't know who the individual was. I had not seen him. The person who would come to the door. It was not the former boyfriend, but the former boyfriend's brother. He'd come after he figured out that I wouldn't recognize him or didn't know who he was. Sharon had come up behind me, and while we were talking, that's when I noticed him pull out the shotgun. That's when I turned around and saw my 4-year-old standing behind Sharon. I ran to grab her, put her back in the bedroom, and as I was coming back down the hall, I went for the shotgun. He pulled the trigger. I get hit. I went down. Sharon ran out the front door, and I thought that she'd run to the direction of a relative. Instead, she ran the opposite direction on the neighbors on the left of us. And it was there where she was finally, unfortunately, shot and killed. Stalking itself was the driver of what eventually led to murder. But stalking, like I said, back then, Rebecca Schaefer, a young lady actress, was on a television show, My Sister Sam, and she had been the latest unfortunate fatal fatality in stalking. And back then, only 14 states had stalking listed as a more so misdemeanors. There wasn't, 14, and there were 14 states that had it listed as, I should say, felony, but all other states had some type of drafts in works, but no one was passing it. Maryland was not one of them. So stalking didn't become a subject to me until I heard my mother-in-law mention it while I was laying in the hospital. When I came out, that was going to be the cause I was going to work towards. So I started to try to work for increase awareness, one, increase in moving it from being a misdemeanor to a felony, as well as implementing stronger penalties against it, as well as fines.
That's crazy. I can't even imagine it being a misdemeanor. But I mean, I guess we can get into the struggles of proving stalking, which I think is a whole separate thing. But I definitely think of, like I said, bodyguard. And so I think that, you know, hearing your story really kind of brings it to, this could just be anybody. I mean, I think that, you know, it definitely falls in line with harassment, like when you hear about, like, you know, what it is. But I mean, it doesn't have to be the famous people, like the whole bodyguard Whitney Houston thing, which totally dates me, because when I asked a teenager one time if they'd ever seen the movie Bodyguard, they didn't know what I was talking about. So yes, there you go. But no, and thank you, Rick. I mean, I actually shared the article that you had sent to me with Mark, the little picture that you had at the signing. And I Googled Rick when I first started here last year. I Googled Rick and I found your presentation for National Crime Victims' Rights Week at, I guess it was at Senate or Congress presentation. And Rick had later shared, I told him that I found it, and he shared that it was just a few months after what had happened to his wife. So still very, very fresh. So thank you, Rick, for all that you've done particularly for Maryland when it comes to it, but at a national capacity as well, for just being an advocate and, you know, really turning such a tragic event into something that, you know, has a cause and is helping people more than you probably could imagine.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, like I tell people all the time, I say, if you want to have some movement, make sure you focus on the cause. Make sure you stick to, you know, what's going on. Back then, like I said, you know, there wasn't electronic capabilities so refined as they are today. So now that's in place, cyber stalking and different other things that are going on. So you could only imagine that back then, had this type of technology been available, how much worse things would have been.
Yeah, but I also
everyone.
feel like at the same time, it's almost easier, right? And this is where Mark's door is opening right now. Like he sees the light, like I'm about to hop into this conversation, because I feel like back then it was like, how did you prove, right, that someone was stalking you? Like, could you take a picture of them while they were outside? Was there a video camera attached to your house? No, but nowadays it's like there's so much information at our fingertips that we can take those pictures, we can save those texts, we can save those emails, we can do all these things. So it's like a plus and minus, because we have so many forms of communication with people that now stalking is easier, harassment is easier, bullying is easier, like all those things are easier. But at the same time, you would think, right, that it would be easier to create a case if need be.
Yeah, that's true. Like you stated, back then, all we could do is keep the letters, hold the letters, take a picture if we could, and because, you know, although we're not carrying the old Kodak camera with an ice cube flash on it, but we're talking still, you had capability of taking a picture here and there. But that was one of the things that also worked against us in regards of the vandalism. The DC could not follow through on charging anything unless there was actual proof. We had to take a photo of them actually doing something to the car, or take a photo of them at my front door.
Of it like occurring, right? And so let's back up for a second. Let's talk about what stalking is. And I think this is where Mark is going to help. Like, what is stalking? How do you decipher? And this guy just keeps on calling me. I told him not to. Like,
right. I think
whatever. Like,
really
he's just being creepy. Like he's a creep. Like he's being a creep, or stalking. Like what? Where are we drawing that line and going, okay, this is next level. This is not just some tame, he likes me, I don't like him, he doesn't get the message yet.
Right. And like we were already discussing, the good thing is now every state does have its own crime of stalking. So that's really good compared to where we were back in the early 90s, when stalking was just first coming out into the limelight. I think a really good generic definition for stalking, because every statute might be different. And we look at stalking as a pattern of behavior directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to feel fear for that person's safety or the safety of others, or suffers substantial emotional distress. And I think that's a really good generic definition of what stalking is. But as we already discussed, and Rick, you talked about all of those different separate acts, and that's what creates that stalking behavior, and it's called course of conduct. And Rick was mentioning time and time, it's so common for property damage to be in part of that stalking behavior. And it might start as property damage, and then it could be text messages or now social media messaging or whatever the case might be. But that is part of that course of conduct that creates that stalking. So I think that's really important to mention. And I do just want to make sure that we know it's not just celebrities that are stalked. It is definitely intimate partner relationships that also have a huge effect in stalking. It accounts for just over 50% of all relationships and stalking behavior. So I think it's really important to know that it definitely intersects intimate partner violence as well. So that's important to know as well.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of edit what I said a little bit, only because I keep referring to it as a guy, but it doesn't have to be a guy. And I just want to open that up. I mean, we've definitely learned in the past, it goes both ways. There's no gender, differentiation. And so I apologize if that kind of came across like, men are always the bad guys in this case, because it doesn't have to be, right? Like it can be the other way around. And I just want to throw that out there for whoever is watching this on, record or, later as a reference. And so, so thank you for that, Mark, as well, as far as like, the intimate partner. And so I guess we can kind of like talk about, all right, so a breakup occurs and one person's just not handling it well, right? Like, so it's when you become maybe fearful or things kind of like take the next level. Could you then, so we're going to tap into Mark's old police responsibilities and knowledge here. Could you then take the stuff from before, like, and go, this accumulates, we broke up because of this, and days after he was doing this or she was doing this, and now it's escalated to XYZ. You can still use the stuff when you still didn't feel unsafe, but it's accumulating, right?
Absolutely. And you can go back all the way to that first act, as long as the statute of limitation allows you to go back and use that as act number one for that course of conduct. We also want to know in stalking cases, a lot of times it may not be a criminal act as well, like sending flowers or candy or a letter or something like that. That may not be a crime in itself, but that behavior can be counted as one act of that course of conduct in that stalking investigation.
Wow, that's great info, particularly as February approaches, right? Valentine's Day, everyone's trying to swoon or court someone, and if it's not,
well, that was the premise why they came to my home. It was a gift. It was a gift the day after Valentine's Day.
Because it was in February 15th, right? Was your
yes,
right?
Yep,
That's
it was
really
a gift.
important. Yeah, and those are called significant dates. And unfortunately, Valentine's Day is one, Christmas, anniversary dates, and intimate partner relationships. Those are big dates to think about, because I've had victims come to me and say, well, I don't know why this day is so important. And that's a question you have to ask that victim, because only the victim might know that answer. I've had cases where it was the first date or the first kiss even, and nobody could make that connection. Why on this specific day did this behavior start back up again? So that's a huge thing to look at in stalking.
Right. And it might not even be known by the victim. It would be known by the stalker.
Exactly.
Like some type of mental, oh, that's the first time I saw him at the supermarket or something, who knows what, right? Good points. And yeah, definitely Valentine's is here. Well, it feels like it's here. I mean, the stores say so. Okay, so we talked about the use of technology. Mark, do you want to tap into the AirTag thing and some of the other technologies that are being used? Because we talked about emails, text, all the communication formats, and especially, even social media. I know that some forms of social media, like, it gets erased, like stories and reels and stuff, they get erased once they're on there. So I guess let's just try to round into some of that technology. And I know that you have been doing a lot of presentations on this, so you probably have more info than I could ever even imagine. So let's give you a moment to share some of that.
Yeah, when we look at air tags, everybody likes to call that GPS technology, but in actuality, it is Bluetooth technology that is being used in that specific tech. So what that means is when somebody has an air tag, or if your air tag is lost, let's say you lost your keys or lost your wallet, you didn't know where it was, you can track that actual device by using Bluetooth technology. And it actually is done by bouncing off other Apple devices. So that's kind of where it makes it a little different than regular GPS or global positioning systems, where GPS devices, you can track that specific device through GPS technology. But the AirTag uses Bluetooth technology and uses other Apple devices to kind of help that device be tracked in that circumstance.
So that's definitely an additional one. I know that I track my children. I track my children all the time with an app, but I mean, they know that it's on there, so it's not like anything secret, because that's the rules in our house. So I do know that there are, it's awful because it's like we have all this technology that we can utilize for safety reasons. I did share with Mark and Rick already knows, like, my husband's a police officer. I like knowing where he is. He used to be with Prince George's County, and the thing that was tough is that if he was at a riot, or he's had to work inaugurations where there's a riot, like, I just like to know that he's like not near that, and he can't answer the phone. So so we have reasons, again, I have teenage children. I like to know that they're safe somewhere. And so there's like all this technology where we can make sure that our family members and relatives are okay, or in safe positions or whatever, but then it can be utilized in such a malicious way. And clearly stalking is one of those. And so I guess, what is there a difference between stalking and harassment? Or is it a form? Like, how are those two things related?
Well, usually, and it, again, it depends on individual state statute, but usually stalking has to have a course of conduct over a period of time, whether it be 2 or 3 or acts or more. Where harassment, you don't necessarily need that course of conduct. And again, it depends on your state statute. It could be one specific act and you can charge harassment right away. Where stalking requires that multiple incidents over a period of time, or multiple acts, whether it be property damage or anything like that. I think that's really important to talk about, because I think we always want to go after the harassment charge, but my opinion, and I've had the opportunity to train judges, and one of the things that they always tell me is you have to make sure, if you have the elements of the crime to commit, not to commit, but to charge stalking, charge it. Because in judges' minds and the general public's mind, if you see stalking convictions over harassment, they're going to take that more serious. So
it's the
anytime
longevity, right? It's like
Right.
the pre-planning of the acts versus harassment, which could be a one-time sporadic thing. Is that
Right.
where?
And I can't tell you, time and time again, often law enforcement will write that harassment charge while all the elements of the crime exist for stalking. So I think that's really important to get that information out, to make sure if the elements of the crime exist, make sure we're charging stalking over harassment.
Okay, so that definitely makes sense when you broke it down like that. It makes sense that harassment could be a one-time thing. They harassed me on this day. It's almost like an assault, right? It can happen just quickly, one time, nothing else is behind it. Whereas stalking is pre-planned. I'm going to go do this on this date, and it's like premeditated, right? So it's a little bit more like proving bullying, if you will. Like, bullying is kind of like it happens over the course of a lot of time. Like, it's not just one time you were mean to me. it's you were mean to me every day, and every gym class you said this, and every, so it's like the longevity of it. So that was great. I tied that in, got it. I hope everyone else's regular role folks at home, get that too. And I think that you tapped into it because you were talking about, judges and law enforcement officers proving stalking and bullying and those long-term things is tough. And we did talk about it a little bit, but I think that with all the means of communication, and what, I guess this is a roundabout question, is what do you do if people don't believe you? You were saying the officers will charge like harassment because it's one time, it's not like the length of time or investigation that's needed. Maybe it's like an easier out because it is a quick, report or what have you, versus needing a detective, or I guess it depends on your police department and how big they are as well, right?
And I think it's important to know a little bit how the legal system works as well. So for law enforcement to have to make an arrest, they have to have what is called probable cause. And that simply means that a belief that a crime has been committed. But when it goes to a prosecutor, to a prosecuting attorney's office, they have to look at proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a little more there. So that's why in stalking cases, sometimes people, oh, we don't have enough to charge stalking, but documentation is really key when we look at stalking behaviors. So looking on how we can document the text messages, if it's social media, if it is some type of GPS technology that the offender used, and we got a device off a vehicle, that can all become evidence in that, and the documentation is key in any stalking case without question.
Yeah, one of the hardest things I believe on the law enforcement side is also having to trust the integrity of that person that's filing that claim, that's saying what's going on, because there have probably been false claims of stalking, false claims of harassment, and things like that. So having to convince, especially without having some type of evidence, some type of recording, things to support what they're saying. Now that police officer has to trust that this person is saying what's actually happening. And that's unfortunate for the actual victim.
Right. Yeah, no question about that. And to follow up on that, it's another reason to make sure, however you can document anything that is occurring in that situation, make sure it's documented. Obviously, text messages are pretty easy to document because we can always go after phone records and things like that. But also look at social media. And a lot of times it's not always easy. When technology is being used, it makes it a little more difficult for law enforcement because we have to usually go after subpoenas or search warrants or things like that, which is very time consuming as well. But I think that's one of the things that we want to make sure when we're looking at stalking behavior, document however we can. And one of the best things to do is just use a documentation log. For example, one of the things, I had a case I'll never forget, that this victim brought in literally 4 big binders of information. And it was basically like a journal of things that have been occurring for years. And I thought it was great, but guess what? Now I have to go through 400 pages of information and look at what is it that I need, because in journals, that victim's telling themselves how they're feeling. And that can be problematic for stalkers because now that victim is saying, this is what gets to me. And what is that stalker going to do? He's going to go out and do those things that she's putting in that journal. So use a documentation log. I think that's the best example. They have really good examples on several websites. The stalkingawareness.org has a really good one, a stalking documentation log. And it's a simple thing of just putting dates, times, what occurred, if a police report was made, the officer's name, whatever the case might be, and document it that way.
That's great input as well. I think that you know, a lot of times, you know, we're, as a society in general, we're doing a lot of the screenshots and such, um and I guess I just wanted to tack on, because you kind of alluded to the fact of you know, looking at text messages, like, is, I guess, you know, it kind of got my mind, of course, you know, our mind works in a million different ways, and I just tend to be the one that tries to vocalize mine because that's just me. But is your responses to them like via text? Like, let's say someone's texting you, should you say, I mean, should it be like how it is like with date rape, or, you know, things like that, where you're like, stop texting me, do not contact, like, should you be very firm about it, is part one of my question. And the number two is, should you just block them? Because then you are stopping communication on your side because you're not receiving it, but at the same time, you're also stopping documentation.
Sure, and that's a great question. And one of the things that we always like to teach is, number one, when we look, and you're giving an example of text messaging or calling, the problem with telling somebody or blocking them from using your phone is that that could heighten the risk of that victim's safety. Because if that stalker doesn't have a way or means to communicate with that victim, what is he or she going to do? She's going to come to that victim in person. And that heightens the risk of that victim's safety. So we have to be a little concerned when we talk about blocking and things like that. I think, especially if that behavior is just beginning, we want to let that person contact that victim, because that's going to add documentation and add that course of conduct of stalking behavior over a period of time. And again, if the stalker's not, you know, using different technologies to hide their identity, it's easy to prove who that offender is. Now, if there's some other technology that's going on, it's not always easy, but it's definitely something to look at.
I would have never even, wow, I definitely, like, as you're saying it, like, it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense that they would move on to the next method or next, I mean, you know, we're talking about people who are, you know, not necessarily in our same mindset, where we are receiving information gracefully and processing information properly.
And I'll share my personal experience. And because I've had so many social media cases involving stalking, my first thing when I first started training was get off Facebook, get off social media. But is that the right thing to do? We know now that's not, because number one, it's a way to communicate with other friends and family. And especially if you own a business, things like that, that's not something that you can just get off of. We have to know how to use that technology safer, and make sure that we're documenting everything that comes in.
Yeah, that's absolutely, I mean, I really, you know, just having that mind blown moment, only because, like, you know, I think that I would naturally be like, block them, like, you know, change your phone number, you know, whatever. And, you know, you're right. I mean, I could see how that would escalate, like, oh, they're going to go and change your number. I'm going to something else. And, you know, you never know what that's going to be, particularly, you know, like, you know, with Rick's situation, like, it could lead to, you know, tragic events. And that's tough, because you really just don't know, you know, the best route to go. So, so good answer and good tip on that one. I definitely think that, you know, as we go through life using technology, you know, we learn more and more about behaviors and what we should and shouldn't do. Should people be telling their potential stalker that they're not interested?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Should they be telling the stalker that they're not interested in whatever is?
I think initially it's a good thing to say, stop calling.
Okay. That was the other part of my question earlier.
Talk to you, that is okay to say. That's not a problem. You know, in some states, it might even be a requirement to tell them that.
I was thinking that as well, only because I feel like I hear maybe a little bit of back and forth, like where, like, the person who's being stalked, you know, the victim, is maybe giving them like a glimmer of hope. And then that just elongates the process, because, oh, that one time, I asked said person if they would go to coffee with me, and they said, well, maybe if I'm free. Oh, no, I'm not free. Like, every time you give them that little nibble, and I'm not saying that it's okay, because, no is no and no is no. But if you give them hope, then it gives them more to push.
Well, Sharon didn't fear her former. And when I first found out about everything, like I said, back in 1989, I could get a sense from her that she had already made that point clear that,
Right.
no, you're not going to contact me. I am married, different things like that. And at the time, my oldest daughter, or our oldest daughter, was 2 years old when I found out about it happening. So um, living in fear or giving someone that power isn't wise. It's in giving someone, giving them your attention and saying, hey, you know, it's okay for you to continue to call me or whatever. You have to make it plain and clear, make it simple. I'm not having this. We're not playing this game. Stop calling, or we're going to report, different things like that. So, I mean, if you choose to live in fear, you will wind up dying in it. So that's one of the worst lessons that I had to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, like I said, with the technology and, the rights of how they are charging stalking nowadays. I mean, it really has come further, Rick. I can't even imagine what it was like with them wanting you to take pictures of, and the whole old fashioned photography system that existed back in 1980 80s, Polaroids and what you call them, ice trays,
Yeah,
and
the old
developing
Kodak with with the ice cube flash on it. Yeah.
developing film over the local drugstore, and no cameras anywhere, seeing if you got a good angle, or whatever on, without it being like digitally right on your phone. I'm sure
Yeah.
proving a case back then was pretty tough. It was like watching My Cousin Vinny, just name another old movie where it's like, tire tracks, or whatever you had to decipher.
Yeah. But you also, in regards to technology and social media, you have to be careful about what you're putting out there, in regards to where you live and who are your relatives, how you're indicating those things. One of the things I always let people know: if you feel that you're being stalked, let someone know. Don't you just hold that message in yourself. Let someone else know. Let your boss know, or your supervisors, or the security of where you work, that type of thing. Keep an eye out for, situations that might happen. Let your family members know, because someone might be a friend of that person. So you have to be careful about who you communicate with, who your interface with, in regards of, like for me, a couple years ago, I remember putting out, there's an individual that's been blocked, but I put out a video of me walking around the Lincoln Memorial early in the morning, and this person lives in North Carolina. The next weekend, his mother contacted one of my daughters and said that he was missing. When his mother sent a picture of him at the location where he was at, I said, wait a minute, I know where that is. He was just down at the Lincoln Memorial, where I had just been the week before, anticipating me going for my morning walks. I said, from that day on, you don't know where I've been until after I've returned.
Yeah. Period. I definitely I can, liken with a lot of those where people are like on vacation and they're posting while they're on vacation and they're doing all these things, and you're like, yeah, but I definitely think that there's some things that you can share easily, and some things that you can wait. You can wait a few days. It doesn't have to be so instantaneous, that all the information that we feel the need to share on social media, and just giving people access to information. But I love that you said, tell someone, have someone walk you to your car. Even if you're a guy, like, again, we're not going to play those gender roles here at this organization or in my life. We don't play gender roles. It's okay if you just want someone to walk with you, even if it's just to have a witness. I mean, if something happens, make sure someone knows that that's going on, because I feel like, Rick, you being caught off guard, with your wife, I definitely feel like had you had known earlier on, I'm sure it would have, I mean, I'm sure you played all the what ifs, but, men dating women, they do tend to be at least, somewhat protective or try to give some input. And I understand Sharon was not afraid of what he could do, but we just don't know what people's capabilities are. You might think someone, but really, how much can you know somebody? And the statistics are tough, and it's hard when stories fall into these categories of what not to do's. I mean, it's awful to be like, yeah, we don't know people. See, we don't know people. It's unfortunate because, Mark, like you said, and like you both you gentlemen have been talking about, stalking usually occurs from someone that is known. It's not usually from a stranger. It's not that starstruck, thing that we might kind of fall back on when we hear those words. That's not how it's going. I mean, it really is one where, people do need to let other people know that, relationships have turned kind of sour and things are just not feeling right. I mean, it really could just be that sense of just not, that person's just not the same person.
One of the scariest thoughts that, and I hate to put this out there, but one of the scariest things is if there might be one stalker, but it may be multiple victims. It might not be his first time or her first time stalking. So we have to also be conscious of that, because if there's a pattern that they're used to, it's something they've grown into, and it continues to move maybe from one person to another, some level of infatuation, some level of admiration, that type of thing. And you not know about it. You don't know naturally victim to victim how they're related. It could be just somebody way across the other side of the world. But the habit, like what Mark stated, the habit itself as a continuous or repetitive nature becomes part of just who they are. And that's a scary part.
Yeah, Rick, you make a really good point there with moving on to different victims. And unfortunately, that's what happens a lot of times, especially in intimate partner violence cases where, yeah, that stalking behavior suddenly ends or comes to an end. And then all of a sudden for months, maybe even a year, you don't hear anything. And then that's because that offender moved on to another victim. And that happens frequently without question. And I even had cases where that offender is stalking multiple victims in multiple states. So again, it just depends what behaviors are occurring in that, but that is something that we see. And it's very common for that stalker to end that one stalking campaign, I guess you could say, and move on to another one. And that's where it becomes, again, frightening, not just for that victim, but for others. And that's why it's really important once to identify that stalking behavior to immediately try to see what we can do to stop that stalking and get some accountability in these types of cases.
Wow. That's that is definitely, you guys are, I'm totally like, I guess I just never even thought that. So yeah, so let's just back up a little bit. Domestic violence leading to stalking definitely is the common, I think, in this day and age. That's kind of like how we see stalking, is that it was already maybe not so great, whether it be verbally or physically abusive, and then it's moved into somewhere where the victim has decided to up and move on and get themselves into a better situation. and the other person is just not taking that, and then it moves into the stalking. And I think that it's tough because when we were talking about domestic violence, it's such a challenge to get people to report domestic violence because of whether it be financial situation, children, a host of other like logistics, where you live, how do you pay your rent, whose name is the car under? I mean, there's a slew of reasons why people don't report domestic violence. But at this point, assumedly, the person has already moved on, because then it becomes stalking, right? Like, could it, right? I mean, is there stalking when you're still together? Could you be stalked?
So absolutely, that a lot of times that stalking behavior occurs while that relationship is still intact. A lot of times even it could be occurring while they are still living together before the end of that breakup, which again, that could play a big role. I recently worked with somebody where that individual put cameras up inside the residence. And they were hidden cameras, so the victim didn't know. So again, it's one of those things that you have to kind of be leery about and look at what type of behavior is occurring and making sure that we stop it.
Wow.
Yeah, that goes into a bit of what we consider really insecurity on that person's part. And I think that maybe majority of the domestic violence situations, elevate, with stalking, but sometimes it's not a domestic issue. Sometimes it's just something that snaps just the day that they're rejected, the day that they're spurned. Those, it's not always a set pattern of things like, I knew he was going to do this. It was, wow, I never knew he did this or she
Right.
did this.
Right. And I
So,
definitely want to make
yeah.
sure that we are, I wanted to get into domestic violence only because I felt like we were talking about stalking in unrelated relationships. That's how I felt.
No, it falls up. No, it
And I
falls
want
under
it to
that
be like,
category.
it's both. Like it can be,
Yeah. No,
yeah,
it falls under
the thing.
domestic violence. Yeah, because in order for anyone to really get attention, you have to reach for the top shelf. So it falls under domestic violence. It's a category of things that happen.
Right.
I'm not stepping away from it. What I'm saying is some of the initiators don't start from abuse. Some of them start from rejection. That's all.
Gotcha. I mean,
We also see those cases on college campuses and workplaces. So, I mean, it's very common when we see that without question. It's a variety of arenas that play a role when it comes to stalking. So
yeah, and it's definitely wide. And we actually talked about it a little bit when we were talking about back to school safety. That was in, I assume, September, because that's when we go back to school. And I think that was like our first one was, your rights at school and, what things happen or what have you. But I mean, definitely, stalking can happen. You're away from home and you think it's just a boy that has a crush on you, or a person that has a crush on you. And then XYZ happens and you just think, oh, and it definitely, at least, we can put out there into the world that it's, male, female, young, old, in a relationship, not in a relationship, stranger, whatever it is, it's those contacts. I guess I'm going to try to go back to Mark's words. I'm terrible at this. The contacts that make you start feeling uncomfortable or unsafe, and repeatedly, right? Over the longevity of, so each time something happens, you should be reporting, right?
absolutely.
Going back to reporting.
Yeah.
Report it and document it. Absolutely.
And then log, and in your log, you can have like any report number or the officer, that's responding. If it's via social media, make sure that you put the, texted me and then keep the text. Because I have a tendency, and I wrote down on my little Post-it note, deleting text. I delete text all the time. Like I use my text messages as a to-do list. So if I get, and I'm just like swipe delete, which is just my tendency, but I do know that you can still retrieve your old texts. Well, I'm iPhone, so I think you can log in and grab like old text. But if something's happening, I would highly suggest not deleting text, because you do want that documentation there. And like I said, I'm a text deleter, so probably not good for someone that's trying to prove something. And then I wrote down police report because I wanted to clarify that you want to call the, you want to get those reports. And I mean, it's unfortunate that you would have to, you're really like spending a bunch of time to try to prove this case. But I think that at the same time, you're sending a message to the stalker that, every single time you do something, I'm going to report, like, I'm going to do this. And you can just be the person that, is constantly the house that all the police officers know is calling, but at least they know that something's going on. And it's at this point, it's better safe than sorry, thanks to the people that have put all the laws in place in the 80s, like Rick, have made it today so that we can do that. And it's not so uncommon. It's just a matter of really kind of catching it before it gets too terrible or that person, decides to take further action. So, I definitely appreciate the tips and hints from Mark as far as like not blocking the text, because I totally would be like, block the text messages, undo the whatever it is that you need to unfriend or unfollow or unpublicize your account. Like I would remove all contact, but clearly that is just from a girl sitting behind a computer. I am definitely not a specialist. So
And I say it depends on the individual's basis too, because each individual case is different. So it really depends on what a safety plan looks like for that individual that's being stalked, because it might look different for other people. So I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, and it definitely sounds like people that are able to commit certain crimes, like there's not a way that you can think, oh, I would have never thought that person. I mean, that's not how that works, right? Like that, we're not dealing with people that just are doing their regular old things. I mean, it's not just the person that's going to work and coming home and cooking dinner and giving the kids a bath and putting them to bed. Like that's not who we're talking about. So anyway, I guess let's wrap up here. What resources are available? What should we do? What should the steps look like? We did talk about reporting every single time, really kind of creating this, the files that Mark hates, but probably loves when you're trying to prove a case. To have too much documentation is not a bad thing. And I think that, it's tough for victims. I think that a lot of things go on where people don't believe you. The police officer might believe you, the judge might not believe you. But I think that, if you're consistent with documenting, then, you're really kind of proving these are all the times that this person has done this, and hopefully, we can help guide those in Maryland. If you're watching this and you're in Maryland and you need our assistance, Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center, we provide legal advocacy and representation in courts for anyone who's been the victim of a crime. Our advocates and attorneys can help guide you and provide you resources if you need them. Mark referred to a few other, I'm going to let you guys go ahead and blurt out all the things that you need. You guys know where to find Maryland Crime Victims. If you're watching this, you've already found one of our social media networks. So just, keep at it and keep with us. You gentlemen want to share some resources and info?
Yeah, I do want to share just a couple because they're very good, and it's a ton of information on their website, which is the Stalking Prevention Awareness and Resource Center. That is, their website is stalkingawareness.org. And the National Network to End Domestic Violence has a wonderful group of people that deal specifically with tech safety. They actually have a tech safety app you can download. It's very useful, so I suggest that as well.
Perfect. Anything else, Rick?
No, the only thing I was going to say is don't stay silent. That's all. Don't stay silent. When something is going on, the moment you get the feeling, tell someone. You have to let people know what's going on. And also make sure that when you do make the request for any type of assistance with stalking or harassment, make sure that your evidence can support what you're asking, that you have properly documented or you recorded the different things that are going on, because it's like anything else, a picture will can tell the whole story. So you want to make sure that you're doing the things in the right manner. Sanitize your personal information. If you are on social media, locations, relatives, different things like that. There's some things that can be shared with everyone, but there's some things that don't need to be known to anyone. So that's for your own safety. That's all.
Good hints there, Rick. Thank you for that. And yes, there's a host of resources available to those who need it. If you need more information, like Mark said, the stalkingawareness.org. Is that where you can find that log as well, Mark?
Yes, it is.
So I'm sure there's a lot of information there. We did a presentation as well, live on domestic violence. So if you find yourself in that situation, please feel free to look at that. We had a different resource available than one of our partners that deals with domestic violence and emergency shelters. I think, let people know, what's going on with you. Like Rick said, let people know what's going on, whether it be your coworkers, your supervisor, your neighbor. Neighbors are, I think, a great resource for so many things that happen in our lives. It's so great to know your neighbors and let them know what's going on if something crazy is going on. And know that there are resources available out there. I hope that this has helped someone out there that's watching it or that is watching it on record. If we could be of any help, I will also share Mark's information when I repost this on our social media. So if you need him, even if it's just training for another organization or what have you, whatever resources you need, Rick is available through our organization. He serves on our board, so you can reach out to me, or you can just message whatever app you're looking at this on, whether it be YouTube or any social media, and I can get word to Rick if for some reason you need him. Rick was recently interviewed with Anne Arundel. Was it Anne Arundel?
Yeah.
Community
Anne
college
Arundel.
paper.
Yes.
And you should see a article on Rick and all that he's done to help this cause. So check it out. And like I said, I hope that this information has been helpful to someone. I know that this is always like kind of a spur of the moment thing, but our goal is really to kind of get information out there to people that can use it in a way that is understandable. And so the ums and ahs and the cutting off, I think, goes with the conversation. So hope this has helped, and we will see you guys in February. I don't know what the topic is just yet.
Just one thing. I want to say thank you to Mark for the work that he's done and what he continues to do. A lot of times to take that type of information in and just continually eat it, and eventually have no way of getting it out, getting the waste off your body. It has to take a toll sometimes. So I commend him for the work he's done. And I appreciate everything that he's doing today. That's all.
Yes,
thank you. Again, thank you, Rick, for sharing your story. And again, January is Stalking Awareness Month, and you're doing everything you can to make sure that bringing awareness to this topic. As you can see, it can turn deadly, and that's one of the biggest things, and why I'm still working in the field today, even after retirement. There's a lot of work to be done out there, in my opinion. So.
Yeah. And I think that, this venue of us doing the lunch and learns are really just, a way to kind of let people know what their rights are, what they can do at home. I think it's, I work with a bunch of attorneys, and my husband's a police officer, and, it's very confusing. It's very confusing for us that are just regular old people. And so somehow, we as a society that, know how to kind of maneuver the system, we need to share it so that people aren't so intimidated with moving forward and hopefully finding a better life for themselves. So thank you again, gentlemen. I appreciate you guys so much, and hope to see you guys very soon.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.